I'm Madelyn Blair, and this is Unlocked. If you're serious about your career, this show is for you, because this is a show all about opening possibilities, so that when you're hit with the unexpected, you have options from which to choose. Speaking of choices, I'm delighted that you chose to be with us. Our topic today is help for the teen years. You know, our teen years are filled with concerns about belonging, about who we are, about belonging, yet not knowing what exactly to do. Oh, and about belonging. They are stressful years, even in the best of times. Teens' bodies are changing almost every day. Their feelings are very strong and sometimes uncontrollable. They're told to think, but often find that their minds are fuzzy. And in the midst of this, they are attempting to discover who they are. You know, when a 2-year-old does something unexpected, we just say, oh, that's just the terrible twos. And when teens do something unexpected, we wish they would grow up. Well, the point is that they are growing up, but it takes time. In the midst of this time in their lives, when social interaction is so important in supporting them for learning who they are and how to act, they're called into lockdown. They were unable to go to their prom. They couldn't walk across the stage to receive their diploma. Their natural resilience was being pushed to the limits. And these changes are only the obvious ones. How can we help them nurture their resilience? This show is being pre-recorded so that you will not be able to get immediate answers to the questions you post in YouTube or LinkedIn, but I hope you will think of questions and feel free to send them to me via email. I will share them with my guest, and the reason being that my guest is a person who works with teens and has studied their particular challenges. I'm going to give you a moment to think about what questions would you ask our guest. So stay tuned. Welcome back. You're listening to Unlocked. I'm Madelyn Blair, your host. Our guest today is Paloma Torres-Davila. Welcome, Paloma, to Unlocked.
Hi, thank you for having me, Madelyn. Hello, everyone.
Let me just tell our audience a little bit about who you are, and then we'll jump into our amazing topic. Well, maybe I should say important topic. Dr. Paloma Torres-Davila holds her PhD in clinical psychology. She is a practicing psychotherapist who specializes in narrative therapy. She is also the research director of Centro Universitario de Servicio e Estudio Psicológicos. Did I do it well?
You did it great. Perfect.
She is a board member also of the Taos Institute, and she has worked directly in treatment development for suicidal adolescents. In her own words, she says, "I'm deeply committed to the healing and continuous development of communities, organizations, and individuals by translating my vast myriad of clinical knowledge to multiple settings." The show is being pre-recorded to assure that we have power throughout the time of the show. I must add an additional appreciation for the fact that you are still recovering from a hurricane that hit the island just recently. How are things going there?
It's a struggle, but one thing we've learned throughout the years in Puerto Rico is that we have community and we have each other. So that has gotten us along through all the challenges. We still have a lot to recover, especially the southern part of the island, which was hardly hit. But we're together in this. So we're doing better than last week, at least.
Good. Well, thank you for making the effort to join me.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. I'd like to begin by asking you just a bit to share with the audience what drew you to working with teens, and in fact, where you are today in your life.
I did, I did my whole journey in terms of career. I was in psychology and politics, and I was more in the macro level.
Mm-hmm.
But then through my practice, I've always done a lot of community volunteer work, and I just connected with teens throughout the years. It's a special, population that is a lot of people find challenging. I find it exciting. I find we connect, and I have some sort of, I guess, talent to connecting and listening and to teenagers. So I began working through different projects, community projects, both in research and also developing these spaces for underserved youth throughout Puerto Rico and also Latin America. So combining those two parts, I started including it into the research with the university and doing lots of participatory methods like photo voice and different arts-based projects to help youth, particularly teens, get through these challenging years of belonging, finding spaces of belonging, as you said.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Photo voice. Tell me what photo voice is.
So photo voice is actually, it's a research method, but it's also done in terms of community interventions. And it's how we use pictures and stories, we join them together so people can express their different voices in regards to certain topics. And it's not just like, here's my voice, but taking this voice to action, to actually changing, creating advocacy in communities, creating advocacy and policy change. So for example, right now, we're working with a project on optimal health for teens in Puerto Rico. And they've been talking, these past 2 years about what optimal health means to them in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of all this, development that they have, social, emotional, the sexuality, the finding their challenges in terms of also physical health. And then we create sort of exhibits however they want. And it's just sharing this voice to create, more consciousness or awareness of how they see the world, how they understand it, so we can start creating spaces for them.
What I loved about that was that you helped them understand that their voice is bigger than what comes out of their mouth.
Mm-hmm.
It's the pictures they create. In fact, it's the story itself. Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, we've talked about teens, and I sort of hinted at some of the challenges that teenagers have. But talk a little bit from your experience or your knowledge, really. Why is that those teen years so important?
So we've always known, right? These are crucial developmental stages. Sorry, it takes me a while before I translate from Spanish to English. But in recent years, with all these developments in neuroscience and all this technology, they've been able to image brains, right? And a lot of research has shown that our brain develops in two critical stages in life. The most we develop is between 0 to 2 years of age when we're babies. And then when we get to our teen years, it's like literally you unplug everything in our brains and then you reconnect it all together again. So all this is going on in the teen's brain. And I'm sure we can all remember when we were in that stage of our lives trying to figure stuff out and everything we were feeling and we couldn't understand. And, this manifests in a lot of ways. It manifests physically, it manifests emotionally, cognitively, mentally. And the context also influences and how, we move through those changes. So it's basically one of the biggest transformational stages in our lives when we think of it, besides, our early infancy.
Gosh, you don't think about that. I never thought about that. That was one of the biggest. Wow. I mean, I knew my teen years were never something I wanted to go back to.
And it lasts quite a while too, right?
Yeah,
we think it's just like a stage, but it's, close to maybe 7 to 10 years.
Yeah. And another thing that I've learned recently is that the executive function of our brains don't even finish physically developing until we're like 25.
Mm-hmm.
It's no wonder we have befuddlement in those years when we were, as I said, we were asked to think about things, but we didn't have even all those functions.
Yeah. And the executive functions, right? A lot of people are like, well, what's that? And it's basically, what helps us make decisions, what helps us organize, what helps us even pay attention. And then you bring this to, a time when we're being so overstimulated constantly, where everything is so rapidly changing. And, you have all this going at the same time, all that noise. Like if you just connect with that and you feel it, it's like a lot of overstimulation and noise on top of what you're already going through.
Wow. Well, it sounds like a challenging area. And so now I'm curious, how is it that you work with teens? Now you talked about the photo voice. Mm-hmm. That's presumably is one way, but what are some of the ways in which you work with teens?
I actually work with teens in a different contexts. So in the more therapeutic individual context, we do the regular, what people would imagine therapy, right? The talk therapy. But a lot of that is, we also use a lot of story work. We work with stories. We work with arts-based methods like collages, like they do their drawings. I had a case with this child where he was in his early teens and we developed a comic book. So throughout the therapeutic process, we would develop his story and we would create characters and change that. Because it's also, you're in this stage where you're very hyper vigilant, right? You're very aware that everybody is looking in on you. And you're very aware that you have to fit in some way and you have to perform and meet some expectations. And so they're very guarded in a sense. And also it may be difficult to find the words. Even when we're adults, we find it difficult sometimes to find the words to what we're feeling and thinking. So through these different methods, we just help them, express themselves in different ways beyond the words. We listen to music. They play me their favorite music, or why is this music important and what it teaches them. I've learned to find a new appreciation for Bad Bunny. I do not appreciate him totally, right? The lyrics in Spanish. But I do understand the message and what he means to this upcoming generation, for example. So it's a lot of listening. It's a lot of creating this dialogue, right? In this relational, conversational space. Mm-hmm. And so that is also done, right? I do it through different research projects, for example, with photo voice, we've done theater, community theater. And we've also done art like body mapping. It all helps a lot. And then we also create some different spaces around communities like these It is a summer camp, but it's more focused on leadership development and helping them find the skills that, everybody has strengths. Everybody, has something they can contribute. And how can we create something within this group that we have together and help them, build that self-esteem, build that strength, and be able to contribute in turn to their own communities.
I love the fact that you're using a vast variety of activities, because one of the things that I recall from my teenage years was that I had unbelievable energy and I had to move. I mean, my mother tells me these stories all the time. She says, "Now, Madelyn, you should have a child just like you to have to deal with this." But I see you're working with children. I shouldn't call them children; they're teens. Working with the teens so that they can use that energy as well. The other piece that really struck me was that you work in narrative and you work in story. In my work, I recommend always that people write stories from their life every day. And it's not because I want them to become master storytellers. It's because I want them to begin simply to examine their life, because it's those events in their life. I mean, they have to be personal stories. The events in their life actually are part of what formed them. So for me, hearing you say that you're working in story, that actually builds in those teens that skill that they know they can do this.
Definitely. And also they can do creative work, right? It doesn't have to be autobiographical, although in a sense it is, right? They always say every fiction story has some nonfiction.
Very good.
So, what does your story tell? I remember my mentor, my clinical supervisor, he would always say, it doesn't matter if it's true or not, if it's factual or not. What matters is what they want to communicate with that story.
I like that.
Yeah. So sometimes we may ask them to tell us something about this or that, and they may find it hard, right? To talk about themselves. But if we talk through a character, it's like there's this sort of buffering, this protection, right? And they can see it from the outside as well. So, we externalize that problem. It's not part of their identity. It's how they're seeing the world. And it can also help us move and shift through that in different ways.
And that's one of the powers of story, that you really can do. You can present it in a way slightly removed, even though you're really the story. Exactly. You're slightly removed so that you can project and discuss and explore things that may be uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I also wanted to add, Madelyn, you said something about the activity, right?
Yeah.
And we always associate a lot of youth with, this activity, and we need to move and we need to socialize and stuff like that. And there's also, I like Philip Zimbardo. He has the shyness clinics, right? And he talks about how we have different roles in life. And there are people who are meant to be like the big voices and the leaders and connecting and the networkers and the activity and this and that. And there's also a space for listeners, right? Not every youth is going to be loud and super active, and that's okay. And it's sort of helping them find how they contribute to the work and the dynamics we're in. Some kids are listeners, some kids are highly observant, right? And they bring some wisdom, a different kind of perspective when we're all together.
Oh, I'm really glad you shared that. And I'm thinking back, I'm sorry, but I can't not think about my own teen years and what this means. My mother, I always knew my mother was really smart. She was. But one of the things that she did was she made sure that I went to art class on the weekend. And of course, in art class, you have to observe. So she was giving me that additional balance. I'll tell you. Okay, I'll stop.
And it's so funny because then in my case, I was always a very quiet and observant. I remember my teachers would always tell my mother, she's going to have some sort of profession where, she stands back and looks, because I was always that quiet child, right? The shy one, if we're going to label. And so then my mother would always push me to be like in social settings, right? Get into sports, get into activities and
Yeah.
dance and stuff like that to connect with other people.
Oh,
So
that's
it's that also importance of having those mothers in that network who see us from the outside and who could sort of give us a little nudge in areas where they think we could develop a bit more.
yeah. Well, I also want to come back to the stories aspect.
Mhm.
I'm currently working with some teens myself because I do individual mentoring around resilience. And when I ask them to tell stories, they struggle. And I mean, I don't push them to that because I'm thinking to myself, well, Madelyn, you have years and years and years and years and years of stories that you can tell. They have fewer. But you've just said something that really not only reinforces what I've been doing, but says I should just continue to probe it, but allow them to also tell fictional stories.
Mhm.
Excellent. Thank you
Definitely.
for that.
And also, I think maybe, there's some of us who are more narrative minded, right? Like we
True,
think in stories.
true, true.
And for example, in Latino populations, we're always telling stories like 24/7. You're in the line at the bank and you're in the line at the supermarket. And I went to, for example, last week, a farmer's market, right? And there in line, we were talking about everybody's different experiences with the hurricane in the mountains in the city. So we're always telling stories, but not everybody, you know, grows up with that narrative mindset. It may be difficult for some people. So it's always important to create that space and not just validate any story you could tell, be it autobiographical, be it fiction, be it creative or different forms as well, but also like provide some prompts or some cues, right? So you could provide there's different like storybook questions that help us just target specific areas of our lives. There's different sort of games we also use. Um,
Is it possible? Excuse me. Is it possible for us to use one of the tools that you use for sparking stories?
sure. So I use one of the many tools I use is story cubes. You could find these on Amazon, Walgreens, and they have different so they have action story cubes. Well, there we go. And they have voyages, which is focused more on the changing and the hero's journey. So each box has a set of cubes like this.
Mm-hmm.
And we could practice if you want. We
Okay,
don't have
sure.
to use all 12 or 16 of the cubes, 9 cubes actually. So we just shuffle them. We do a lot of this. We can do it like one-on-one. We can do it in groups. We can do it in family settings. And you drop the dice, right? And then you get 3 images.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
There you go. So my invitation would be create a story with what you see there.
Wow.
And by the way, here's one thing that I always say: we may see different things and we may interpret the image in different ways, and that's okay. So I would say, Madelyn, if you could create a story with beginning, middle, and ending with those 3 images you see there.
Okay. All right. Let's see
You
if
ready?
I can. Yes. Now, I interpreted those three images as a sparkler,
Oh,
a beehive, and a magnet.
okay.
Okay. All right. Now I have to come up with a story. Okay, I'm going to tell. I think in the time frame, I'm going to tell one that's fictional. Okay. The flowers on my patio look like little sparklers. I mean, it's called salvia, and they kind of grow, and there's little, the flowers are small, but it's like there's little red sparkles all over the patio. And there's a beehive nearby. Well, maybe 100 yards away, but bees travel long, long distances. And they come up, and if you go out in the morning and you look at the flowers and these sparklers, it's like the sparklers attracted the bees, because there could be 100 bees just buzzing in and tasting all these flowers. It's almost as if those flowers are a magnet drawing them up. And so the morning that I saw so many, I decided that it was important for me to thank the bees. And so I went down to the hive, excuse me, and I thanked them for coming up and giving me such pleasure in watching them drink their nectar or collect their pollen. That's my story.
That's a beautiful story. I was right there with you.
Oh, good.
And then I would say, like, to me, it sounds like beauty and that interconnection of the ecosystem is very important to you. And also, if we could take this as a metaphor for our lives, are there times where you have felt like those flowers, where you attract bees, where you can't do something alone, but you need the bees to come, right? And together you work in that magnet, and together you create this beauty and you create this balance that we need in life to be able to sustain ourselves, like the bees do with the flowers and the pollen. And we could develop the conversation from there.
Absolutely. Oh, I think this is marvelous. I mean, I'm sitting there going, well, how did she know that?
And another way, oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say, people who listen to this show know I often talk about beauty.
Oh. I felt it. So that's important. We always have to be very connected and listening.
Mm-hmm.
And, your voice changed, your tone. You became like calmer. And so I noticed it was important for you.
Good. Well, that's the power story.
Yes. And also you can do this within, with groups. We do, for example, we throw the dice and everybody takes one cube. And you have to do the yes ands, like an improv theater.
Yes.
Which is you always, and that's an important lesson for life as well, in any relationship, and especially with youth. You always take what they bring. You don't say, oh, that's impossible, that doesn't exist, we can't do that. You always take it and you build upon it. So it's like, yes, the bees were the magnets, and they start pollinating the flowers. And, a different way, if I were to sort of deny your experience, I would say, well, why are the bees going to those flowers? No, they have another tree or they have another garden with a lot more flowers, Madelyn. Why are you focused on your own flowers? There's a whole garden you can pay attention to, right? So I'm just like denying your whole experience there and everything that's important to you, instead of just building upon what you brought and creating something together with it.
What a marvelous way to teach young people that indeed they are linked to one another, and denying that linkage breaks that continuity. Oh, that's lovely.
And it links also intergenerationally, right?
Yes,
we always
yes.
think like, okay, so they have this little group and they can click between them because they understand each other. But we can actually create these bonds throughout different stages in life and throughout different generations and learn from each other, which I think is important as well.
Absolutely. Oh, my. Well, I'd like to extend that just a little bit, because one of the, now my machine was not supposed to make any noises, but I guess I forgot to tell it that. Where was I? Where was I?
We were expanding upon the listening to each other, the importance of listening and the importance of connecting through different generations.
Yes.
And
when you
being humble enough to, to know that we can always continue to learn from each other.
Yeah. That's, thank you for that. I don't usually lose my train of thought, but
it's okay. This happens with youth all the time, and this happens with us, It's being human.
Well, thank you. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to turn there. See, that's where it was. it was only supposed to vibrate for me. So now I'm fixing it so that we're not going to get disturbed anymore. No,
Okay.
no. There, none. I've never had to do this on that's,
But it's good because you're performing what being a teen feels like in this world, right? Where we're always being stimulated and distracted. And then, it takes a while to fall back on track
yeah,
with
okay.
the conversation. That's okay.
Well, what I was about, what I was trying to say originally was the fact that teens really do have this need to feel they belong. And in fact, people who are highly resilient almost always have very strong social support somewhere in their life, whether it's a partner or a family or colleagues. Are there times when you work specifically on that aspect for the teens?
Definitely. I think it's one of the crucial points and one of the fundamental areas where we always have to provide that supportive context. People are very mindful that children in their early age need that protection, right? And then as adults, we're free to do whatever we want. But teenagers, they still have to live under a roof while experiencing their independence, right? They're developing their own identity and independence. So we always work on creating that support network. And that support network, it would be ideal if it could be your family. But some people don't have necessarily, those resources at the time, or their family, at that time can't provide the type of support they need. So, for example, when I was working with teens with suicidal behavior, and we would do like these family support sessions, I would bring in the coach. I would bring in, the community leader or the leader from church. Anybody that they found was a person who could, guide them, who could be that safe space for them. And also with teens and communities, it's how they create this bonds between them and how they can support each other. People listen to us in different ways. And, sometimes your parents won't have, they're worrying about other stuff about us, right? So the conversations you have with your parents can provide you some sort of, safe space and listening and guidance. And conversations we have with peers, like-minded peers, can provide other sort of, safe spaces where you can, feel it's a bit more neutral to express yourself because they're going through something similar, or maybe they're understanding that, we're all exploring and we have no clue right now, and that's okay. So I always work to provide these different support networks with different levels, on the family level, on the community level, with teachers also, and, with professionals that may support us. For example, I work with youth with eating disorders. So, I have a nutritionist who works with me. I have a medical doctor in integrative medicine who works with me. And together, we provide that team of support to youth, to the teens and their families as well. So I think it's important to always be very open-minded on what that support network can look like.
I think that's really important. I think sometimes, and I have met parents like this who feel they are the only support mechanism. I feel very, very fortunate myself because when my daughter was in her teens, she had a coach that she really respected. And so that coach became an alternative support for her during difficult times when she didn't want to share something with me or for whatever reason. She had that. So I feel very lucky that happened.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important to be compassionate with ourselves as well as parents, right? There's no manual on how to parent. Every life is different, right? Every being, even within the different siblings, it can be a totally different experience.
Yeah.
And something I always remind parents as well as youth is you're doing the best you can with what you have.
Hmm.
And, sometimes other people can come in to support with different sort of skills, and that's okay.
And that's okay. Yeah. Yes, I often think that children are part of the scheme of things so that they can help adults grow up.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Well, you've probably said some of this, but I want to just expand on it. What are you learning from your work?
From my work, it's been a lot of learning these past few years, especially with within the resilience framework. I think it's important. What I've been learning in recent years, it's the importance of listening. Maybe before we used to jump to trying to solve things quickly, and for the healing process, I've been learning it's very essential to be heard to where we are now, to where we've been, and do that pacing. Connect with people and create the pace with what we are at that moment, right? And it may be different for different people in different settings. And also the importance of our actions can create different realities and can construct or can build possible futures that we didn't think could be possible or we didn't think could exist. So in my experience, what I have been learning is that resilience is not just adapting, but resilience is also learning to be able to change those things that, are not actually doing great for us, on individual, on social levels, on professional levels.
I love that last understanding because for me, I have defined resilience as very much the decision making. Where Viktor Frankl says between stimulus and response, there is that space. And in that space, we have the power to choose our response. When you're hit with the unexpected, you have a moment. It may be a nanosecond, but it's still a moment when you think about, okay, what am I going to do to move forward? And I really resonate with what you just said. And the aspect of preparing you for that kind of moment. One of the exercises I tell people is every morning, decide what's the most important thing for you to do that day and go do it. Well, it's the real issue is the decision of choosing the most important, because it's a very hard decision.
That would be very tough for me, Madelyn.
I know.
It'll take me a while.
Exactly. I mean, it used to take me like a half an hour before I could say, okay, this is the most important. Now, of course, it's a little quicker simply because I've gone through many alternatives so many days before, weeks before, months before, that it's faster, but still it's a tough decision. So when you get to that moment, when you get hit with something, you say, look, I've done this before. I can do it now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely. Great. And stories help us remember that, right?
Yes.
Because in difficult moments, in moments of crisis, talk about that executive function, right? We sort of freeze and we forget everything.
Yeah.
And stories can help us remember what we've been through that we didn't think we were capable of at that moment.
Yeah.
And we just have to try.
That's great. Our own memories. Because in fact, our resilience is in a sense strengthened every time we call upon it. Mm-hmm. And it comes from remembering that moment that got us through. This is good. I love it when I discover new language around what I know. So
and the word remembering, right? We reconnect, we create that remembering, that connection again. And not only with our individual stories, with our family stories, with our ancestral stories, with our community stories.
Okay. Now, normally this show is all about your career and how you deal with work situations or whatever. This is different, but I felt it was important because many people who are pursuing their career very aggressively or not have teenagers. Mm-hmm. And I always refer to it as I only have so much bandwidth in my head. And if I have to be doing so much over here, then it's going to, steal it. How would you advise parents who have a teenager? What are some things they should look for? What are some things they should be doing to not only ease it for their children, but give them the confidence that they're doing the right things?
I think, first of all, you always have to create the space within yourself to be able to be there for another. And I think that's very important. And as professionals, and speaking as a woman, right? And I do work a lot with women as well. We always have like these voices, these shoulds, right? And I have to be this, and I have to be the great mom, and I have to be the great career woman, and I have to be, the sister and the mother and the wife and the daughter and take care of everything. And it's like, we keep pouring our glass of water until suddenly we don't have anything left. So we need to fill that cup. And different ways to fill that cup is one, taking time for yourself. And there's a whole lot of guilt I've seen that comes with that.
Yeah.
And there's like the stigma where it's selfish, but see it as a time where you're taking some time to just connect with yourself, listen to your voice, so then you could be there more present for others. Otherwise, there's really, I wouldn't say no way, but it's going to be very difficult to be able to connect with your teens or with other people. And also, don't be afraid to call on any type of support. Yesterday, this just happened yesterday, right? My sister, I have all my nephews are teenagers now. One is already graduating college, and those were a tough few years. That was the first teenager in the family. And so my other sister, she has two teens, and they just switched schools. So it's a totally different environment. She's a single mother. And, they're going through all these shifts and all these changes. On top of that, we just had the hurricane. The power's still out in a lot of places, and her fridge got, it got ruined. So now she doesn't have a fridge, and it's always like a hassle and a struggle. And she's a teacher, and she had parent-teacher night, and all this is going on. And then her kids, my nephews, they're trying to sort of fall into this new pace where they came from this very structured school to a school where it's more free-flowing, but, they have to structure themselves. And it's, been taking them a bit of time to learn that other way of being. So last night I got a call. It's my nephew calling me, and I'm in session, right? I'm in therapy sessions, and I hit ignore, and then he calls again, and he texts me. He's like, call ASAP. So I ask, the person in therapy, I'm like, can you give me a second? And I text him. I'm like, I'm in session until 7 p.m. I can call you after. And he's like, I left my book bag at school, and it has his computer, his laptop in it. And then my sister was going crazy because she already had jumped, she's in hyper response to everything, to stress. So she already jumped to the conclusion where it was going to get lost or stolen, and she had to find money besides the fridge now for a new computer. And so they called me because I live like 2 blocks from his school. If I could go and see if there was a security guard and find his book bag. So I did. It was there. And pick it up and keep it safely at home so they could come this morning and pick it up before going to school. And, she was just all frazzled. And I was like, I get it. You're not exaggerating. I get it. You're strung out. I get it. You're stressed. I get it that she wanted to rip his head off because she's like, I'm only asking you to pay attention to your things. I'm not asking for much, but he's a teenager. His attention span is all over the place. He went to a volleyball game. He had a game at another school yesterday, and he forgot his book bag. And these things happen, but they were not afraid to call for help and call for those resources that could support them. My mother, she's a retired teacher, so she helps tutor their smaller one. And just being okay with, there are moments you're gonna be able to handle it all, and there are moments where you can't, and that's okay. And we have to be compassionate with ourselves.
Oh, great. Paloma, I am so appreciative of the time that you've set aside for this conversation. even in the midst of your recovery. The story you tell of your work and your recommendations about teens is essential for all of us who have had the luxury of making it through our teen years and beyond. And I think what I particularly noted today were those lessons that you talked about, the importance of listening, that hearing and listening is essential to healing, and that our actions have consequences, but at the same time offer different realities.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it helps us understand better in ways on how to help or how to, be there in supportive ways. For example, one of the groups we were working with in Photo Voice, we had this whole vision of how the pandemic and isolation impacted youth, right? So they're not socializing, they're not going to prom, this or that. And at the same time, we've been starting to listen a lot about body issues. And I was telling them, like, so help me understand, what do you mean? And they're like, well, I'm very conscious about my body because when we went into lockdown, I was very skinny. I hadn't developed, puberty hadn't hit yet. And then I come back to school and I have a whole different body. I weigh 20 more pounds. People are looking at me differently. And it makes total sense. But at the same time, I was mind blown at the moment because I had never connected with that because, I wasn't going through that experience. And it wasn't until, we just created the space for them to bring whatever it was that was on their mind at that moment. And they brought that. And we were like, okay, whoa. So now we have to recalibrate a bit and, change what we're doing. But that's okay. We can recalibrate and we can move along. And what do you need? And maybe I don't have all the answers, but we're going to then connect with other people.
Fantastic.
To help provide this.
Well, Paloma, I can't believe that we are almost out of time. But is there anything in particular that you would like to leave with our audience?
I think we're pretty much, closed with that. And I would say the key word is always compassion. Compassion with yourself and compassion with your teens and your youth. We're going through difficult times and more challenging times than typically. And sort of remember where we were when we were young. And I could connect with those feelings. And so now imagine that in the world these teens are living in, right? And all the changes and challenges, and that we're trying to provide a sort of stability for them in an ever-changing situation. So let's be compassionate, breathe, and then that space between stimulus and response, take the time we need and figure it out and make a choice. And that choice could include other people as well.
Well, thank you so much, Paloma.
You're welcome.
Oh, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Unlocked. If you have, make a comment in social media about what you learned and might do differently as a result. And if you're on YouTube or LinkedIn, click the like button. Better yet, subscribe or follow me. And please, check out my book, Unlocked, on Amazon for the practices that actually work. Now for special request. I have been asked for more than TV, more than blogs, more than my book. And I'm preparing something more now. To create something of value, it needs to speak to your concerns. I'm curious about what challenges you are facing these days. Take a minute and send me what challenges or issues you are dealing with these days that you would like me to address. For each of you who send me a response to this request, I will send you a copy of my book, Essays in Two Voices, as a thank you. And speaking of thank yous, I want to thank you for joining us on this segment of Unlocked. I'm Madelyn Blair, excuse me, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilience.